I just saw the promise about, the work and the members and just the people in SCN. And just to, I get energized. I'm really serious about it. No matter how much I have going on, when I meet other SCN members or we go to the summits, I feel really energized. And I just think there needs to be a place and do my part to sustain this work from a support perspective. So I see SCN as more of a support organization, because even though people are part of other infrastructures, I still think when you talk about entrepreneurial ecosystem building, the work that we do, it's still isolated. It's isolated. It's lonely. It burns us out. So yes, my passion project is to make entrepreneurship ecosystem building sustainable, and I see SCN as the platform to do
that. We believe that anyone, anywhere can make startups. After spending more than a decade building our own company, we've learned a ton. We've mentored founders and built startup communities. We've helped craft government policies, and we've also invested in businesses. Some that succeeded and some that didn't. We've helped thousands of startup founders, funders, and facilitators. We're inspired by their dreams and determination. Our goal is to travel across America and meet as many as we can, tell their story, and share their lessons. We're on a mission to help you succeed, to show you that you aren't crazy, you aren't alone, you really can do this. We're here to make startups together.
So, formally, my name is Mark Lawrence. I'm the managing partner of Incubate. And what Incubate is a full stack entrepreneurship-led economic empowerment firm. So we say economic empowerment instead of economic development because we lead with community. And we sit right at the intersection of community development, venture development, economic development, and just wealth creation, specifically in underrepresented communities. So in that role, I work more from an advisory standpoint, community development, traditional community development corporation standpoint, and then on the tangential side of venture development, because I would say when you always say venture, you think tech, and I think venture is broad ventures that really can transform communities. So I like to say at an analog level, I get to play SimCity with communities, and specifically communities of color. And then in my other role, as you well know, is that I'm the board chair of Startup Champions Network. And, SCN was founded out of Startup America, but it's really around this idea of a grassroots effort to develop the professional field, what we call entrepreneurship ecosystem building, which is really relevant to what I do.
So do you remember when you decided this was the type of work that you wanted to do?
Actually, I do. Actually, funny story. So a little bit more background on me. I grew up in what we call Big Four management consulting. When I left college, they were deploying this thing called the internet that no one thought was going to be anything. So that whole transition of technology transforming lives, I had a long career in consulting doing that. So 17 years in, so I worked 10 years at one firm and 7 at another. I was like, well, how can I make this work more impactful for my community? Because I traveled. I was one of those traditional management consultants, Sunday through Thursday, off on a project site or on the road, Friday in the office, home for a little bit, then went out and do it again. So after you get married and having kids, I was like, I have to make a decision. How do I take all these skills that I've learned and make them more impactful for my community? So I started the work. And in my time being in tech, the telecom bubble, the internet and all that, did have a time to be involved with a lot of tech-based ventures. So more in an advisory role, had some founding. I didn't have successful exits that changed your life, but helped some companies advance. I was like, if there was a systematic way to do this, what would that look like? And thus started the idea of Incubate while I was still a senior manager at another firm. Up for partner, that didn't work out. So I said, all right, I'm going to dive in to this thing called Incubate full time. And then at that same time, this idea of entrepreneurship ecosystem building was emerging. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in my local chamber meeting and, I met this woman, phenomenal woman called Julie Lenzer. And we were talking about some stuff we can do in my local community in Maryland, Prince George's County. He's like, look, you should go to this thing called the eShip Summit. That was on by Kaufman, got me the invite and everything. And I was like, all right, once I went to that first eShip Summit, I was hooked and I was locked.
Do you remember what year that was?
That was the first one. I believe it was 2016. I believe so.
What was your first Startup Champions Network that you went to?
My first Startup Champions Network Summit was in Denver.
Okay, and that was the same one I went to.
And that was interesting to me because, again, I got it at the high end level of a broad nationwide, but then I got it at the grassroots level. And what was interesting about that is that Startup Champion Network Summit was also co-located with Denver Startup Week.
Right.
So that was just
it was a different time.
Yeah, it was a different time.
Victor was there, and they announced the Kauffman Grant and all that stuff.
Right.
So back from those like 2016, 2018 days, how has the overall landscape of this work changed?
I think the work itself, I'll say it in two ways, right? I don't think the work itself changed, but the way that people referenced it and the lexicon. Because again, I didn't know I was an ecosystem builder until someone told me. It's like, yeah, it sounds like what you're doing is this. But there's a lot of people that were doing this work. But I think over that time, people start to identify with it, understand it, or at least start using the same basic term as entrepreneur ecosystem builder. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the big changes. And the other things, I think the network started to become expansive and be visible. So people, started doing it on their LinkedIn profile, social media. They started to have conversation. And you saw all these ecosystem building type convening. So yes, there was Startup Champion Startup Week, but NBIA, they had their e-builders, and then all other groups started to do this work or identify it and start to convene people to help advance the field.
So what do you think the biggest advancements of the field have been?
I think the biggest advancement of the field, is some of the work that was followed on from Kauffman E-Ship with trying to get certification, get recognition around this term of ecosystem builder. I think a lot of the work around the community development aspects of it has advanced a lot, and just drawing all other types of people in. Because again, when we first entered the field, obviously you know that, and we just said it when we were just in Shenandoah Valley, entrepreneurship, ecosystem building, economic development were two separate things. Now you're starting to see it blend and become part of the sort of same thing, because it is a new version of that, but it helps empower, support it, so more people see themselves as economic developers and community developers in this work.
And you take really, I think, a different approach to it than a lot of other people do. And I'm curious, how you came to that way of doing it. Because you work with a lot of organizations, right?
Correct.
Because a lot of people that we talk to when we go visit their local ecosystem, it's like they've got a space. And that's not exactly how you do it, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
But so yeah, let me tell you a funny story about that, right? So whether I attribute it to my management consulting background, being very project-based and working on different things, or what I think is my ADHD, which I think that we all have, whether we want to admit it or not, I treat it as an experiment, right? So I started working directly with entrepreneurs. I was like, well, wait a minute. They're busy building their businesses, so they really can't pay, right? So I was like, I'll unite and center on the entrepreneur. Then I started working with organizations that cared about entrepreneurs, whether it be your local community development, economic development, but they still had the atypical metrics, right? Jobs created, the stuff that they try to measure, and you were trying to make it fit. That didn't work. Then I started to talk to some of the creative venture firms. They're like, look, focusing on building the ecosystem can really de-risk your investments, and help you build community and do things like that. But again, they don't care about that. They care about returns. So, after trying around and going different places, which I call my consulting project base, I've centered on this model where it's really around anchor institutions, like education institutions partnered with local communities and community development organizations that want to see this thing called entrepreneurship outside of tech, right? I do believe you still need those tech anchors because we live in a tech-enabled economy, but how do you make that bridge and that connection? So take some of the principles that you see in tech ventures and tech enterprises, apply that to a place in community.
I was just going to ask, knowing that, this is the work that you've done, and you came from this management consulting background at what sounds to me like the pioneering industry of the internet and right. whatnot. And so now you sort of are repeating that pattern because you're now at the pioneering stage of this emerging field of ESOs. And so if you were to put out there to say okay, what would this look like in 10 or 15 years, knowing that if it mimicked anything like you saw 20 years ago in terms of okay, is there going to be thousands of these kinds of things? Is it going to be, done in a different way than what you see it is being done right now?
Yeah, I think so. Again, my hypothesis, I say, again, this is what I'm testing out. I think that this work is going to live or be stabilized in a couple type of institutions, and I would call them community-focused institutions. I think if you talk about community development financing institutions that always care about programs to, make their products available to small businesses and entrepreneurs, I think they care about the ecosystem. Not saying that the other people don't, but it's sort of in their mandate. Again, community development organizations that really care about a specific place and they want to ignite it with innovation and entrepreneurship. Like, for example, like a lot of these revitalization projects and things like that. How do you bring new and emerging industries to blighted or often overlooked communities? You need to find some entrepreneurs that care about that community, from that community, and then educate them and then provide them with the resources to experiment and do things.
Yeah.
And I think the third piece of it, you'll see it just like how what I say, the model I always use, and this is the third part of my hypothesis, just like they say tech transfer and tech commercialization, I think you'll see entrepreneur transfer outside of institutions as well.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really interesting is you talk about this idea of getting anchor institutions and community organizations to partner together, but oftentimes I see that there's a little bit of tension that exists between them. And how do you break that down?
Still, it's an ever-evolving challenge, but you got to find the right person and personalities around it, right? So usually when you talk about anchor institutions, they have to have someone that really is committed to regional economic impact, right? So if that's in your mandate, that's in your charge, you're forced to look outward, right? Because most of the time when you deal with anchor education institutions, for good or for bad, you're still under that model. I take talent, I give it skills, I empower it, and I send it off into the world. If you're regional economic development impact, you want to focus some of that talent in the community around where your institution is. And then my other thing that I've been noticing, the nature of education is changing as well. So what's helping to sort of advance this work a little bit differently is that it's not this serial thing anymore. You learn a skill, right? And it's been exacerbated, obviously, by the student debt and the rising cost of education. You learn a skill, and specifically in the communities I serve. Let me also put that in. You learn a skill, you get a job opportunity in that skill, you figure out where you want to go, and then you continue to advance in that skill, right? So traditional education, like I know a ton of lawyers that don't practice law. They do other things. I know a ton of architects that do ecosystems. So I think we want to craft these environments and these experiences so that while they have that core, they can become more community connected and community invested. And so what that forces you to do is transform these institutions, rather these silos, and make them more connected to the community, resources for the community. And that's where the community organizations come in, because and it's not I don't have the quantitative data for this, but just based on my opinion and talking to people, my discovery, if you're 3 years removed from an anchor institution where you went to undergraduate school, unless you're in that area, you don't have enough connection to the ecosystem. Whether it's an alumni event, or you come back for homecoming, you lose that connection, right? Because either your friends or those folks have graduated. But how do you expand that? And that's by getting you to locate, see an opportunity to do those things as well.
So help us understand the communities you serve, then the challenges they face, and why this entrepreneurship strategy is so important.
So the communities I serve, my hometown community, which is out, suburb Maryland, South Suburb Maryland, which is Prince George's County, Maryland. I do a little bit of work in Montgomery, Maryland. It's heavily service-based in government. It still has the government flavor and those type of occupations. Professional services. So I was like, look, yes, we need to diversify our communities. There's a little bit of tech and instrumentation depending on the government agencies that are there. But I see that they have a lot of these government resources or government anchor institutions that, yes, I can get a contract, I can go through a government set-aside program, but once those programs are attacked or something changes or that contract's lost, what happens to the company or the wealth I'm trying to create? So the thing that I've led with is we can use this thing called entrepreneurship. Is if we develop the restaurants, the barbershops, right, around that, the food entrepreneurs, because a lot of people have these shadow ghost kitchens they cook in their house. I'll use that as an example. What would it take for them to, one, get a food truck, two, build a community, get a brick and mortar place, but then three, obviously restaurants, one or two, become part of a restaurant group, right, that's known for different cuisine. So what are the system and tools and things that are in place for that? So I start with some local stuff, but then again, being in my tech background, I always try to marry it with the tech thing because they grow exponentially fast. Folks are starting to disperse outside of the traditional hubs. and they want to be closer to the community. So how do you marry and have that conversation? Because I've been in both worlds, to use it as a community transformation engine. And then I do a lot more with advocacy now than I do, because then how do you get the policies and things to support that? Because again, ventures care about return, tax credits, incentives, lease space, and those other things, where the government cares about, revenue dollars, commercial tax dollars, and those other things.
Yeah, one of the things that I struggle with a lot in this work, and I imagine you and most of the people we know struggle with it, is that it seems like there's a growing acknowledgement and awareness of the importance of entrepreneurship, but it still feels like when the federal government decides to make an investment, it's really centered in the innovation space. Like, how are we driving these really high growth, scalable things? Maybe it's related to our national defense or something of that nature. And then when we talk about doing the work to support, people getting a food truck or whatever, then everyone will say, well, but we have an SBDC system and whatnot. And I see that there's a tremendous gap in kind of broad-based focused entrepreneurship that is getting ignored on both ends of the policy front. And I guess I'm curious, is that the same thing that you're seeing as well? Like what are, kind of like, why is the work in the way that we're all focusing on it, where we are somewhat broad-based, why do you think it's as critical as it is?
So again, I think I have the answer for that, right? Because I think the perfect point, and I like to make this point, we use the word ecosystem, and we assume we know everyone knows what it means, right? But for me, in experiencing those same sort of frustrations, the innovation ecosystem and the entrepreneurship ecosystem are two different things to me, right? They're overlapped in Venn diagrams. So we say, all right, we'll resource it because it's this innovative ideas. But to me, innovation really focuses on the tech, as you know. And yes, national priorities. You want to be better in cybersecurity. You want to have clean tech. But I still think you have to divorce out and treat the people that are doing that, whether at all levels and the communities they live in, a little differently. And that's why I said the entrepreneurial ecosystem is really two distinct things to me. Oftentimes, talking to government, talking to the legislators, talking to people that are driving resources, I try to advocate for, for separation. They include it, they treat it like the omnibus bills with the earmarks. They include it in the broader thing, but they don't leave the pathway to communicate that, yes, this policy, this change is also supposed to impact the communities, not just the technologies. And you'll see that, for example, with the tech hubs, right? So if we talk about the ED tech hubs as an example, not actually, but again, you got all these people working around that say, okay, I'm designated as a tech hub, I got to focus on technology. No. You need to also focus on the communities that you're going to build and locate these enterprises as well, and also the other businesses that could benefit by you being designated as a tech hub.
So what does it look like, knowing that you've been doing this work for a while? How would you define a success story that maybe you've helped move through the process? Was it a particular storefront? Was it a particular industry? Was it a particular person? Can you kind of share with us? Because a lot of what we're doing on this roadshow is basically bragging about,
right.
Look at what, not that look at what I did, but it's look at what my ecosystem was able to create as a byproduct of the programs, the services, the contracts. And I was wondering if you could share with us any examples.
Yeah, so I can do that. And going back to where we started on the conversation, this notion of place, building sort of these on-ramps in untraditional places, right? So I started as the program product service guy. I was like, look, we can't program our way out of it. So now I find myself more into development, real estate development of innovation places with intention. So it's not just a brick and mortar. So one, I'll give you two successful examples of what I think are successful so far. Our local community college, Prince George's Community Colleges, serves over 40,000 students, numerous curriculum workforce programs, but didn't really have anything anchored for entrepreneurs. So me at the time working with the president, and that's probably around the 2016, 2017, said, what would be a business plan? Again, in their strategic plan that they just redid, they had a means for regional economic impact. I said, what if we created a space on campus where companies, entrepreneurs, and everything could interact? So what we did is we repurposed a computer lab. I redesigned the lab around design thinking, made it a place, and we call that the Innovation Hub at Prince George's Community College. And we did design thinking sessions. We worked with local entrepreneurs. We worked with students that had an entrepreneurial mindset. We taught people about innovation, and that was very successful, right? So Other community colleges are looking to do that. And then once they, they got a wind of that, I got invited to become a part of the National Association for Community College and Entrepreneurship. And I was like, well, hey, we want to do that as well. So I thought that idea of taking that ecosystem approach and opening up the front door to the community college made it more accessible to people not just were matriculating either to go to a four-year institution or to get a workforce certification or degree. They really started to see this thing as entrepreneurship as an opportunity. So that's more the community-based. An industry sector-based one, I'm in Baltimore. I team with the City of Baltimore and the Minority Business Development Agency local office to do this thing around manufacturing. They had an advanced manufacturing center, but they want to figure out a way to help sort of grow and scale minority manufacturers. So we came up with this concept of the Manufacturing Innovation Hub Cooperative, right? So we used the cooperative model to create a space and place where they could share resources, share technology, and share just opportunities on how to go after things together. So they're still in the early stages. None of these are more than 5 years old, but I think when I started focusing on space, community and anchor industries, that started to shift the model rather than just pitching this work as just programs.
Okay, those are great. Those are great examples. Thank you.
No problem.
Who was the first person that really helped you to make this happen? And what did that mean for you?
Let me think about that. I think it's two. I would say the first person was the president of Prince George's Community College at the time. Her name was Dr. Charlene Dukes, luminary in this area, in this region. And she's like, yeah, I like that presentation you were giving me about the entrepreneur development stuff. What would it look like if you did it for me at my college, right? So at first I had my anchor client. I was like, yes, I got a community college, got the president's buy-in. Because usually you had to work your way up. But she heard me speak. She showed me a couple conferences. And she said, all right, what would that look like, if you did that for me? And I think the second person was our local chamber president, right? He was like, yeah, you're the big four consulting guy. You got some great ideas. Why don't you come, join us on the board, share those ideas. And that opened my eyes up to a whole bunch of community connections that I could do this work.
Nice. So what made you, with all the volume of work that you have to do to grow Prince George County and everything else, decide to give all the time that you give to Startup Champions Network and do this work on the national stage? For
free, by the way.
Well,
as a volunteer board member, because you have obviously so much extra time.
No, I don't. I have other boards too. I was on the board of my local Incubate. I just saw the promise about, the work and the members and just the people at SCN. And just to, I get energized. I'm really serious about it. No matter how much I have going on, when I meet other SCN members or we go to the summits, I feel really energized. And I just think there needs to be a place and do my part to sustain this work from a support perspective. So I see SCN as more of a support organization, because even though people are part of other infrastructures, I still think when you talk about entrepreneurial ecosystem building, the work that we do, it's still isolated. It's isolated. It's lonely. It burns us out. So yes, my passion project is to make entrepreneurship ecosystem building sustainable. And I see SCN as the platform to do that.
It's one of my favorite places to go. I'll always say that. And I feel immensely privileged to be part of that board now as well. One of the things I wonder about, and it's one of the reasons I also joined the board, was that as much as ecosystem building, I think, is getting attention, maybe the question for you is, do you see risks for us in our field right now, especially centered around the sustainability and the burnout issues there, and how might we better address those for the field at large?
I don't know. I don't have the answer. How might we better? I have some thoughts, but the risk is, like you said, the sustainability and the burnout, right? Because we do this work and something else, right? But this work takes a lot to want to get whole. You're translating. You're sitting at the intersection, because that's the thing. Like during COVID, and that's when I was, right after COVID, I guess I became the board chair. But during COVID, while I was looking at finance and church, we were like, look, if convening and bringing people together is what we do, and we can't do it, a virtual summit just doesn't work, right? I hear you. It can maybe continue the conversation, continue the momentum, but it's nothing like going to a community and seeing how they do their work, how they build the ecosystem, meeting local entrepreneurs. So we said, okay, what does the typical persona of an SCN member look like? We said, all right, well, we don't know. Let's try to talk about some. Whether they're economic developers, they run incubating co-working spaces. So I think the risk is the burnout because it's not just one thing, right? It's multiple things, but it's that and you do it plus something else, and it's not fully funded. Usually you're carving resources from something else you do to help sustain the ecosystem just because you care about your community and see a gap. Thoughts on how to address that? I think the number one is advocacy, right, as we all know, keeping at that, at the local levels, state levels, and national levels to keep that in the conversation. I think that's the start. I don't think that's the only start of it. I think the second part is looking at how community-based economic development organization talking to philanthropy, like having ecosystem building to me could also sit with community foundations, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Any organization that has community empowerment, economic mobility, sustainability development, I think could use ecosystem builders. But the goal is to start to bring those people into the fold and start to get to see them to have the conversation. So those are sort of some of the top of the ideas.
Do you think in the world of entrepreneur support are too many organizations overlooking the opportunity of engaging more in real estate development?
I don't know if overlooking. I think that's the expansive nature of it, right? Because again, I don't know if they can add it to their plate because that's a different model. And then ideally, it would be entrepreneur support, entrepreneur investment, and real estate.
So really, they should call you if they want to integrate.
Yeah, and then go back to I would have if I had a management consulting firm, that would be the three practices, right? Innovation centers and innovation district development, entrepreneur support and sort of entrepreneur care and feeding, and this whole idea of investment and venture development, right? How do you invest in companies? And that way, what I've been spending a lot of time on as a smaller side is this idea of a venture studio model for ecosystem building. You take a group of ventures founders and they spin things out, but they spin them out intentionally into a community. Because to me, the traditional incubation acceleration models are too broad, and they just invent the people, but they don't put them in a specific place. But taking these community-based venture studios, and then one of my projects I'm piloting that right now to see how much entrepreneurial activity you can get across the whole spectrum, not just tech. Because obviously, when you think about venture studios or these funds, they always have a thesis or an industry sector they focus on. It's like, what if the industry sector was the community, if that makes sense? And what type of ventures you could put there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a lot, but I'm glad you guys come at a good time because I'm thinking about this. I was just thinking about this today. And specifically when you talk about community revitalization, what would be a venture studio that you could put in the community that's not focused on the industry sector, just focus on all the things that will make that community, transform.
Would you put that in your neighborhood?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And you could, I could see how you could sort of reverse your network, right?
Right.
Because you have all these people
right.
in Maryland, you have all these people in Delaware. Yeah, you're like, okay, come to me instead of going the other way around.
And then take models and things that work. Because again, when you talk to government, they always want to see, all right, where has this been done before, use cases.
Totally.
So you bring it in and you put up this little lab, show them studios, and then, because I learned this from management consulting. We used to travel around the country to find models. But the new things, you got to bring it in and import it into the community.
So what's next for SCN?
So a couple of things. So again, looking ahead at what SCN does best around summits. So planning those further out, treating more of like a road show, right? So strategically looking how we go across the country to visit different types of ecosystem. Doing some theme-based summits. We've partnered and we've done a policy summit. Doing that every cycle. We'll figure out maybe it's during election cycle, maybe out election cycles. And then another theme summit around access to capital and how the different forms of capital to support this work. In addition, as the membership grows, how do we maybe not do summit, but pre-summits or mini town halls in communities around metrics for ecosystems, advocacy in local market, those things to sort of build a momentum as we travel around the country, right? Because I enjoy going to summits and I enjoy learning, but it's hard to always take that in just at the two summits, right? You'll pick a nugget or two that you're following on, but how do you keep this peer-to-peer learning network constantly growing, constantly evolving, constantly sharing new ideas? And then the second part of that is now that it is the network, right? Because my perspective, what we've tried to do is not build SCN like another organization where it has an executive director, has a structure. Yes, it's the network. It's truly a networking group, right? That's membership based. We have the back office taken care of by people that manage networking groups, but we can focus on empowering, finding solutions that networks and network members have and making that available to broader network, right? So as this thing, and we're going to call those and standardize those as challenges, right? So it's something that's working, as you all know. We're going to highlight that, lift that up, but we want to partner with the local ecosystem builder to build that across the network. And obviously, it's not a sales thing. It's something that people want and can subscribe to, but we're not going to be, taking that part. And then the third part of where I see SCN growing is really being that to the point of getting resources to ecosystem builders, having that data, having that metrics, having the number of entrepreneurs, and going after some of these larger sort of funding opportunities for ecosystems that they couldn't get by themselves, and be sort of that aggregator and sort of project and product manager for the local ecosystems.
I'm going to, before we go on to the SCN part of it, because I just see you light up when you talk about it sometimes. Right. And I'm just really thinking, like, what is it underneath all of this that gives you so much joy?
That it's sustainable. I don't have to get a regular job to do it. And I know where we came from. So that's why I light up. It's like, man, when I'm thinking about those words, like, where, it used to be a dire story. Oh, there's silos. People don't talk together. People don't care about entrepreneurs. But I light up because that's changed. And I light up because I think I've had a small part to do with that. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think I'm walking in my, it's to me, it's a corny cliche, I guess, saying, but walking in my purpose doing this work. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's gives me the joy, the energy, and makes me light up about it.
Yeah, it's I'm starting to see that for a number of us that have been around for a while, that we're starting to like hit the stride, and it's like those really complicated things that we were trying to, like, you can see the dots, you know exactly how they go together, and you're like, come on everybody, yeah. And then other people just start to be like, oh, okay, I can do that with you, and it's transformative.
And again, and like you said, and again, for those that don't think in systems, I use the sports analogy. You see the plays, you have the playbook. All right, now we need to get the right people in the right position so we can execute. Right? Yeah. So you know the plays you're going to run. You know what your first 6 plays are going to be in your offense. You know what you need to do on defense to protect the people. So, yeah, that's why I light up about it.